So let's talk about this. Why is NXT so much more beloved by the hardcore WWE audience than the main WWE shows? Raw, SmackDown, 205 Live. And I want to have this discussion with y'all and kind of give you my thoughts, because there's a lot of different reasons, I think, as to why NXT gets so much love. And I have my own kind of ideas as to what it is. And it's probably a number of things. But, first of all, I want to say that this video is totally based on the fact that people have said how much they love NXT so much better than WWE. Raw, SmackDown, 205 Live. And overall, NXT is owned by WWE. I'm sure, at least I hope, that everybody knows that. I really hope that you know that. Paul Levesque, Triple H, is in charge of NXT. He's the head guy there. And, one of the big reasons I think that NXT is, so much more beloved is because he's a pretty good guy at eyeing talent. He's pretty good at finding guys who either have a buzz or who he thinks are good and bringing them in. Now, the thing is, though, those guys he brings in, they're not going to be NXT guys. He brings them in with the idea that they will eventually graduate to the main WWE roster, right? So one thing we cannot say here is we can't say that NXT has a, quote, better roster, even if you think they do, because that's a temporary roster, because NXT is still developmental. At some point, Ricochet, Johnny Gargano, all those guys, Adam Cole, they're going to be on the main roster at some point. Many feel they should already be on the main roster, including myself. But they have to find things to do with some guys, and they don't bring them up right away. So I don't think it's fair to say, well, NXT has better wrestlers. Yes, NXT does have a tremendous amount of wrestling that I think in many ways is better than the main roster. But the question is now, why? Why? Now, Tommaso Ciampa, I've called him Ciampa for years, but it's Tommaso Ciampa, and Gargano and Aleister Black. These are all, Velveteen Dream. They're all great workers. There's a lot of good wrestlers in NXT. Keith Lee is there now. There's a lot of great talent there. So if you think the NXT roster is better, that's fine. But remember, WWE, Raw, and SmackDown have AJ Styles, Daniel Bryan. They have Seth Rollins. They have a lot of great wrestlers too. So I don't think it's fair to say that, because remember, it's temporary. Presentation-wise, NXT looks pretty much the same as WWE. They have the same kind of cameras, very similar transition effects. The lighting is about the same. They have yellow ropes. So you can't say NXT is produced better than WWE because it's all one big production team. I think the reason as to why NXT is so much easier to watch, I think, than the main WWE show is because the investment and the time that you put into NXT is either paid off or is lessened than WWE. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, 3 hours of Raw, 2 hours of SmackDown, sometimes 5 to 7 hour pay-per-views, and other stuff like 205 Live and stuff like that some people watch. The main WWE roster, and I don't even know if 205 Live counts. It's like its own division, right? But the main WWE roster, the main WWE shows are very long. Raw, the 3 hours is really freaking long. And a lot of people don't even watch all 3 hours. They just DVR it, right? Because there's a lot of filler. There's either really long promos, there's matches that people don't really care about, or angles that are never really go anywhere. So I think that's one thing that really hurts Raw from being an enjoyable, tight-knit show. Because when Raw was 2 hours, you didn't have to fill up all that time. You only focused on the important stuff that you wanted to get over, and you moved on. And sometimes they would delegate the rest of it to SmackDown or to Sunday Night Heat when that was around. Things like that. The 3 hours on Raw makes the show very long. I think with NXT, it's so simple because with WWE, you've got your 13 pay-per-views a year or whatever, 12 or 13. Then with NXT, you've got 4 or 5. You got 5 now. The 5 big shows. NXT reminds me of what WWF used to be. And what I mean by that is growing up in the 80s and 90s, there were only 4 to 5 pay-per-views, depending on what year we're talking about. And they had some bonus shows here and there, but there were only a handful of pay-per-views, and thus you had months and months to build up your storylines. Now, back in those days, you had a lot less television. You had like 2 hours of primetime wrestling, then you had Superstars Wrestling Challenge and All-American for a while, and then Mania got brought in as well as Raw, and they canceled primetime, and then Raw was 1 hour. So you never really had any 3-hour TV wrestling shows. The only 3-hour shows you got were the pay-per-views. Then as wrestling evolved, as time went on, pay-per-views became 4 hours, and now they're all pretty much 4 hours. I mean, minimum 4 hours. The big ones like Royal Rumble, WrestleMania, plus SummerSlam, they go sometimes 6-7 hours if you include the pre-show. So I think with NXT, it's such an easy product to watch. You've got your weekly TV show. It's short. It's to the point. You have your pay-per-views that are the Saturday before the big WWE shows, and you can watch those shows, and there's less dilution. There's a focus on a certain number of characters, whether it be Tommaso Ciampa, Aleister Black, whoever we're talking about here, Cassius Ohno, Matt Riddle. There's a small number of guys they focus on, and maybe they do need more time. Maybe they need a second show, because they have a lot of talent. But I think the main reason as to why NXT is better than WWE is because it's so much more simple. The storylines, I think, are simpler. I think that the guys do work hard, and I think they're going to work just as hard when they get on the main roster. But these guys are allowed to do more, from what I understand. They have a pride in their work, and they really have that hunger. NXT is kind of like college football. Somebody told me a long time ago that college football is better than NFL. And now, I don't know if I think this, but people have said this, because those college kids play harder and try harder. Now, I'm not saying that Ricochet is going to get lazy when he gets to the main roster. That's not what I'm saying. But it seems like NXT is less overproduced, and thus those guys can do more things they can't really do on the main roster when it comes to promos as well as moves. So there is that. But I think it's just NXT reminds me of what WWF back then, when the F was in, used to be. And that's why I think people like it more. I really do. The talent is great, but I think that's the main reason. That's the main reason. I think Triple H's leadership is good there, and I think that the commentary is also fantastic with Mauro Ranallo, creating a much more realistic approach to it. He's way better than Michael Cole is. That's my reasoning. If you have any reasons, let me know in the comments why you think that NXT is better, what your favorite things are about NXT. But I'm not saying that I think it's better, because I actually really like SmackDown. SmackDown's great, but NXT is just so much easier to watch. You know what I mean? It's easy to get through, and that's my thoughts.